Hey everyone, this is Brian from RPG Site, and I just want to talk about another game from 2017 that kind of went a little bit under the radar, and that is Elex. Elex is the newest IP from German developer Piranha Bytes, the makers of the Risen and Gothic series of video games. For full clarity, I wanted to state that I have not personally played any of those series, but parts of their reputation has, I guess, preceded them. I kind of went into Elex expecting maybe not the highest level of polish, or it to be mechanically awkward in certain ways, or just to have some components that just weren't very good. Unfortunately, that's just kind of the sort of mentality that I had gathered through osmosis before even booting the game up for the first time. However, I was interested in trying it out mainly because I thought that the setting was interesting. It's set as this sort of science fantasy blend where parts of the game look very much like Mass Effect Andromeda and other parts look like something more akin to a classic Western fantasy. Elex is an open world RPG with all of the gameplay components that you would expect of a game in that genre. You'll undertake quests that will have you out exploring the world, finding new locations, defeating monsters, and kind of pushing the main narrative forward at your own pace. The general premise of the game is that it takes place on the world called Magalan, which has been recently hit by a comet containing Elex. Not only did this comet deal irreparable damage to the civilizations that were living on the planet, but it brings with it a bunch of magical properties such as the ability to power technology or to even augment personal abilities. It's even used as the game's currency. It's essentially a very powerful resource that all of the conflict in the game revolves around. The remnants that are left on the planet are fighting over Elex based on their own personal goals and motivations. There are the Berserkers, which are a technology shunning group which want to use Elex to power their magical abilities. There are the Outlaws that use it like a drug who don't believe in any sort of law and order at all. And finally, there are the Clerics who want to use Elex to power their advanced technology, and they also want to control its use as a currency. One of the major gameplay components of the game is deciding which of the three factions you want your character to ally with to take on the looming Alb threat. The Albs are those who have consumed Elex and manage not to mutate. While mutated creatures do make up a good chunk of the enemies you'll fight in the game, the Albs serve as the game's central antagonists. They're those that have managed to consume Elex not to the point of mutation, but to augment their abilities into effective super soldiers. Early on in the game, before you're given a chance to really choose a faction and get access to the benefits that it bestows upon you, such as access to better abilities and weapons and armor, I found the game incredibly difficult. A lot of the enemies that you'll meet outside the first area can down you in just a couple hits, and I found myself running from more battles than actually being able to defeat any creatures. It's one of the few games where I actually found myself enjoying it more once I turned the difficulty down to easy. Another toggle that is beneficial to some players if they find themselves not enjoying the combat of the game is to toggle the infinite stamina on. This is the closest the game has to a built-in cheat mode, where infinite stamina will allow you to dodge roll or swing your melee weapon as many times as you need to in order to stun lock enemies and defeat enemies with the lowest amount of frustration possible. It's not a toggle of sorts that I would enable in many games, but in this game where I found that the combat wasn't the strong suit of the experience, I didn't find myself too distraught by enabling it early on. With the difficulty set to easy and a companion character to help distract enemies and body block dangerous blows, the combat ends up being rough but functional. Unfortunately, the game does suffer from numerous other bugs, including some weird NPC pathing, some characters that get stuck in mid-animation, as well as some general odd weirdness that kind of exemplifies this lack of polish that I was initially worried about. And I played this, after a couple months of post-game patches, and some of these are still popping up. It wasn't severe enough to get me to stop playing, but it was frustrating to encounter these on a semi-regular basis. The world design of Elex is something that I am a little bit mixed on. The world map is effectively divided into 5 regions. The 5 regions are the 3 factions, the Albs, and then a central neutral region where multiple factions overlap. It's done in a way where it feels kind of mechanical, like all of the berserkers live in a lush green forest, all of the outlaws live in the desert, every single area the albs are concentrated in is snowy. There are some in-game explanations to delineate why this is this way, but it never really helps it from feeling any less mechanical. Pretty much all of the game will take place on this world map, and what I mean by that is that there aren't really a number of discoverable dungeons or instanced locations. As part of the main story, you will go to these interior areas called converters, but in a way they're largely disappointing because you'll go to 5 or 6 of them throughout the course of the game, and they are all literally identical with the same layout, same types of enemies, even the same location of a locked door with the same sort of keypad puzzle to get inside. It's really disappointing. I can't really overstate that. There's really only 1 or 2 locations in the game that don't fall on just the general overworld map or one of these converters. The last thing to talk about is the general narrative of the game, as well as the overall quest writing and design. The first part, there's a lot less to talk about. The narrative is pretty straightforward. To give a 1-sentence summary, you are an ex-alb that is trying to decide what your personal role is for the future of Magaland. It's not very interesting. There's not a lot of captivating story beats here. Where the game really shines is in the rest of the quest writing outside of the main narrative. I actually found the quest design in Elex to be exceedingly well done, almost to the point where it kind of carries the rest of the game along with it. Even if you're not a fan of the gameplay or the combat, the world design, the story, the voice acting, or the narrative, I feel like the quest design on its own is enough to make this worth playing. There's a lot of variety, there's a lot of hidden wrinkles, there's a lot of interesting ways these quests interact. The logbook found in-game will kind of give you some inclination of some of the interactions where certain quests will kind of fold into others accordion style. But then there are a whole bunch of unwritten consequences for decisions you make when undertaking these quests. Just to name a few examples to try to illustrate the point, there is a Thieves Guild in this game with its own, typical series of quests. But in order to access the guild, you've got to effectively get the blessing of one of the other members, which usually involves doing something that's not quite morally upstanding. For instance, one of the members will ask that you implicate the wrong innocent person in what is effectively a drug bust. Another one of the members will require that you effectively take revenge for something that this person wasn't entirely guilty of. A few of the options are more or less, guilt-inducing than others, but you kind of do have to make a decision if that's a part of the game you want to access. There's other quests that will change their reward based on how you carry out the quest without kind of showing the player what to expect. For instance, in the outlaw camp, one of the higher-ups wants you to explore a supply chain issue within the outlaw encampment. So you can make the decision to fix the supply chain completely or to only pretend that a solution's been found and hope that he doesn't notice. So when you make this decision, it's probably going to come back and hurt you in some way, but you don't quite know how. And then it's kind of surprising to do another set of quests and then find that this guy will end up sabotaging you for not doing what he wanted earlier, despite him having rewarded you for a quote-unquote job well done when you tried to mislead him. One exceptional highlight here is that early on in the game, one of the warlords of the Berserker clan will ask you to retrieve a technological weapon for him, and these Berserkers have kind of shunned technology. Players that don't read carefully or aren't paying attention might just do what the quest list asks them to do, grab the weapon, bring it back, expect a reward, on to the next thing. But those that are careful enough might realize that the entire thing is a setup, and you have the option of having the quest canceled out of your log, yet despite that you return to the quest giver for an even greater reward than you would have received for just doing what it blankly stated. These are just a couple of examples, but I hope they help at least loosely illustrate the point that the quest design here has a lot of interesting ideas going on, and you'll find yourself on multiple occasions realizing what an earlier action can do to affect a current situation, even if the parts seem pretty distinct. Perhaps unsurprisingly, some of the best quest writing is within the companion quests that involve the characters that are traveling along with you, with many of them having some very interesting and unique climactic moments that might have you second guess whether they should be your companion at all. Though no amount of praise that I could heap on the quest design of Elex will do much good if the core gameplay is found to be, insufferable or worse. It's one of the most uneven games I've ever played. While the game has a lot of aspects that I wish it did better, I can at least commend it for the one thing it does really well. It's a hard game to genuinely recommend for a numerous number of reasons, but if you're the type of person that is most frustrated by modern RPG quest design feeling more like chores, then I do suggest that you give Elex a chance.